Hello and welcome. My name is Laura Holland Green. I'm an associate professor in the School of Architecture at the University of Arizona, and I'm also associate dean for academic affairs in our College of Architecture, Planning and Landscape Architecture, or CAPLA. I'm delighted to have you all join me for what I think is going to be a fabulous lecture tonight. Our audience ranges from second-year students in architecture and landscape architecture to more advanced undergraduates and graduate students to seasoned faculty and students from around the university and the country. Because the audience is so large, I want to begin by providing some important housekeeping instructions that I think will help things to go smoothly. So first of all, unless you are the one speaking, please mute yourself on your computer. Sound quality is going to be especially important in this particular lecture, and we don't want it to be compromised by unintended background noise. When we get to the point of some musical clips, if you can't hear them well, please adjust your volume. We tested them before you were admitted to the lecture and things were playing well, and I trust that will be the case as we go forward. In addition, because you're so numerous tonight, it will not be possible to find your individual Zoom windows very easily. So if you have questions as the lecture progresses or as it comes to an end, please type them in the chat, which I will monitor. The lecture should last about 40 to 45 minutes. And then during the discussion afterwards, I will call on those who have written questions. And if you'd like to pose your question yourself, by all means do so at that time. If not, I will read it out loud for our joint consideration. So this is a lecture that can be framed in many ways. And the first frame is a local one, because this is a lecture hosted by the U of A in the CAPLA lecture series. So I'm going to turn now first to my colleague, Bob Perkins, for the U of A land acknowledgement and information about coming events in the CAPLA lecture series. So Bob, please.
Great, thank you very much, Laura. I want to extend our sincere welcome and excitement that we have such a large and diverse group here. I am a member of our College of Architecture events committee, and I just wanted to update you on our lecture series coming up. We're hoping in the spring term to be mainly in person, and we're very excited about that. We are kicking off with a exhibition and lecture series with Will Bruder. I believe that will the reception for the exhibition will be on the 13th of January, which is a Thursday, and with a lecture at 5 p.m. on the following day, the 14th. Then as we go through in January, we have Linda Samuels. In February, we're going to have Mabel Wilson and Lisa Shrink. Then followed by Upe Fukager from Texas Tech, Arlie Atkins, Molly Van, and Sigrid Adriansen will be the final event, which would be in early April. So if you go to capla.arizona.edu and look for the news and events menu, you can do a pull down. You can find out more about the speakers and the schedules and verify the times. So again, that's capla.arizona.edu. Then the other thing that's of great importance to us is to acknowledge the land of Arizona and the peoples of the land of Arizona. And we respectfully acknowledge that the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being the home of the Tohono and the Yaqui. We're committed to diversity and inclusion. The university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and indigenous communities. We pay our respects to those communities and their elders past and present. So I will now hand it back to Laura. Thank you very much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you again virtually or in person in the future.
Okay, thank you very much, Bob. And thanks to all the hardworking faculty and students on the events committee. It's a lot of work, I know, and we're just delighted to have access to so many wonderful scholars and architects. I also want to recognize that while the lecture is hosted by the School of Architecture here, it is co-sponsored by a number of other units on campus. They include the Department of Civil and Architectural Engineering and Mechanics, the Department of History, the Fred Fox School of Music, the School of Art, and the U of A Medieval, Renaissance, and Reformation Committee. So thanks very much to the colleagues in those units who have helped to get the word out. Funding for the lecture comes from the International Center of Medieval Art, or ICMA, located in New York City. I joined ICMA as an art history graduate student and found it to be an organization that socialized me in the most exciting and collegial way into the larger intellectual and professional world of medievalists. And you know, when we medievalists get together with each other and with those from other periods of study and other disciplines, good things happen. So my colleagues, Lisa Schrank at the University of Arizona and Corinne Schleif at Arizona State University, and I offer our thanks to ICMA for its support, and in particular express our gratitude to President Nina Rowe, Programs and Lectures Committee Chair Brian Keene, and Executive Director Ryan Frissinger. The attendance at today's lecture, which is already up to 193 people and growing, bears witness to the vitality and reach of ICMA. Now I have to say that this is not just any lecture. This is the Stahl Lecture for 2021, founded in honor of Harvey Stahl, a man I knew well because he was my doctoral advisor at UC Berkeley. Harvey died in 2002 of Lou Gehrig's disease, which struck him in his prime and took him away from us far too soon. It's a pleasure to be able to take a moment now to speak of him, both to those other students of his and colleagues who established a fund in his memory, and to current students and colleagues of mine about someone who really influenced me. So I ask you, whoever you are in the audience, have you had the good fortune to experience a teacher of boundless curiosity across different ideas, sources, disciplines, and methodologies? Have you been inspired by the eloquence of a scholar who could speak or write with real precision and real poetry about works of art or architecture? Have you basked in the warmth of a generous and playful mind? If so, then you know what it was like to be a student of Harvey's. He was truly an inventive and questing thinker, and one who showed his students what a life, not just a job, in academia could be. For a kid from Texas, he really got around to New York, to Paris, and eventually to Berkeley. And he spread the power of medieval art and of creative inquiry wherever he went. And just as an aside, I'll never forget seeing him tooling around the Berkeley campus in his jeans and Birkenstocks, typically with red or purple socks on, or even better, the twinkle in his eye when he was really taken with the pleasure of a new idea. Given that my first experience of Harvey was as TA in a course he taught on early Christian and Byzantine art, and knowing his training by Byzantinist Hugo Buchtal, it gives me particular pleasure to introduce our guest speaker tonight, Dr. Bissera Pentcheva. I'm going to take the liberty of calling her Bissera because we in schools of architecture are on a first name basis with all our colleagues and all our students. And I will note further that I've been a great fan of her work for many, many years. Professor of Art and Art History at Stanford University with a courtesy appointment in the Department of Classics, Bissera has been at the forefront of scholarship on Byzantine topics for some time, with insights at the intersection of architecture, art, acoustics, liturgy, theology, and now political ideology. She's the author of 3 books: Icons and Power, The Mother of God in Byzantium, The Sensual Icon, Space, Ritual, and the Senses in Byzantium, and most recently, Hagia Sophia, Sound, Space, and Spirit in Byzantium. And I show you my own copies of these books just so you can see the luscious photographs on their covers. She's also the editor of 2 more volumes: Aural, Architecture in Byzantium, Music, Acoustics, and Ritual, and Icons of Sound, Voice, Architecture, and Imagination in Medieval Art. In these publications, she's trained interest on the ways in which objects and buildings are animated as they are perceived in changing conditions of light, sound, smell, and ritual enactment. To understand these phenomena in the past, she has adopted contemporary technology to capture the atmospheric effects around medieval objects and in medieval buildings, and to match sonic performance today with the acoustic signatures of buildings of the past. Her lecture this evening is on Eternal Victory, Hagia Sophia and the Byzantine Vision of Empire. Please welcome Bissera Pentcheva.
Good evening, everyone. It is a great pleasure and honor to give this year's Harvey Stahl lectures. I know Harvey Stahl. I had never been able to see him in life. The first time I arrived at UC Berkeley was for a position that was advertised after he died. And I had applied both for that position at Stanford, and life brought us in such a way that I ended up at Stanford. But that was my first encounter with the UC Berkeley department, where everyone spoke so admiringly and lovingly of Harvey Stahl. And once again, it is an honor to give this lecture. I also would like to thank Laura Holmgreen and Corinne Schleif for the invitation, and to wish Corinne a good recovery. So I will start today with Hagia Sophia. My talk focuses on the idea of imperial victory and how a space like Hagia Sophia magnified this political concept, transforming it into a sensorial experience of light and sound, more specifically a synesthetic audiovisual effect of glittering gold raining from the dome. The 6th century Justinianic Church became an imprimatur, whose liturgy, as it developed in the later centuries, became a model emulated at times and at times surpassing that of Jerusalem. Today, I will turn to the heyday of the Great Church, the period after the end of Iconoclasm, 843. In the course of the 10th and the early 11th centuries, Byzantium consolidated its strength, winning victories against the Arabs, the Slavs, and reclaiming some of its territories in Syria and Palestine, Asia Minor, and the Balkans. These triumphs were staged with splendor and public pomp. In the capital, processions started at the Golden Gate and proceeded through the imperial fora to the Forum of Constantine, and finally to Hagia Sophia. Culminating there, the historical memory of the Virgin as the protectress of the city in the earlier Avar and Arab sieges of the 7th and 8th centuries became also a ritual performed with procession and the singing of the famous Akathistus hymn at the Vlaherne Church, here in the northwest corner of the city. These ceremonies were so mesmerizing that echoes of them are present way beyond the imperial city. Hosios Loukas, a church near Delphi in Greece, is an example of this development. I use it in order to enter into the magnificent figural mosaics that were once in Constantinopolitan churches, but no traces of them have survived today. The monastery of Hosios Loukas was established in the mid-9th century and acquired a magnificent church, the Catholicon, with gold mosaics inaugurated in 1011. The patronage attests to the power of an aristocratic elite, directing the Byzantine armies. Hosios Loukas counts among its founders several strategii, generals, and a catepano, military and administrative governor of Italy. Its mosaic program has not been successfully explained up to this point. Kremos, in the late 19th century, relying on 18th century liturgical sources, reconstructed the texts for the Feast of the Saint on February 7th and the inauguration on May 3rd. But art historians have not drawn on this material, believing to be post-Byzantine. After conducting an extensive research in the Byzantine liturgical manuscripts, such as Menea, which is the Byzantine equivalent of the Sancturale, I can now determine that most of Kremos's information has roots in the Middle Byzantine period, and thus it leads to the liturgical spectacle of Constantinople. By drawing on the Constantinopolitan liturgy, I will show how the constellation of mosaics elicits the processions and chants celebrating imperial victory, and Mary as the akatemachitos strategos, invincible general of the Christian armies and protector of the Byzantine capital. The feasts of the Ascension, Hippapanti, which is the presentation in the temple, and the Akathistos uncover the investment of Hosios Loukas in the liturgy of the great church. The Justinianic Hagia Sophia overpowered its audience with its unprecedented and unimitable scale of a dome raised over 56 meters above the floor and a diameter over 30 meters and an interior volume of over 250,000 cubic meters. The great church could gather up to 15,000 people. It mesmerized all with its gold mosaics, marble revetments, and a flood of natural light pouring from its glassified walls. The architecture skillfully staged the movement of the sun. The orientation coincided with the solstice, which made for a spectacular sunrise in the winter season and the inauguration day on December 23rd, following the Christmas feasts. The red contour on this slide marks the circumambulation of the sun at the winter solstice. At this moment, the first sun rays penetrate directly the central axis of the apse on the winter solstice. The light beams gradually descend and slide across the floor as they illuminate the pavement and then the north wall and finally disappear on the northeast corner at sunset. Light touching the marble floors and walls produces a liquescent effect, where the solidity of stone perceptually transmutes into the appearance of water. Gold further enhances this aesthetic of water, as light transforms metal and glass tesserae and polished Procunesian marble into the incandescence of molten metal and the opalescence of mother of pearl. The acoustics of the space amplify this sense of the water. The large interior volume and polished reflective surfaces of stone produce a reverberation of over 10 seconds within the range of the human voice, singing voice. And also some of the harmonics, as you see, continue to be present in and be audible in the space over 10 seconds. The dome contributes to an extraordinary aural experience, an acoustic waterfall, as high-frequency sound reflects from the curved surfaces and rains down on the nave. The music composed for this space amplifies these visual and acoustic effects. It uses melismas, the singing of many notes to a syllable, and intercalations, these are non-semantic vocables, like ho, he, ha, no, ne, na, that are interspersed in the words. As a result, they stretch the semantic chains, making meaning dissolve into prosody. The wet acoustics of the space further pushes sound into a liquid behavior. The music composed for Hagia Sophia, like the special chants for the Feast of the Exaltation of the Cross, further reveal the effects of the golden waterfall. The notes sung at the apex of the composition produce the sensation of a shimmering rain that falls down to earth. I will illustrate this with the recording of Cappella Romana from 2016, released in their album Lost Voices of Hagia Sophia, done in collaboration with the Stanford project Icons of Sound that I co-direct together with Jonathan Abel at the Stanford Center for Acoustics for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics, abbreviated as CARMA. The singing is imprinted with the acoustic signature of Hagia Sophia, a process known as auralization. Listen to the high notes in the apex of the composition. This troparion is composed in mode 1 authentic, final D, here reached at the word eυλόγησον, may you bless, addressed directly to God. And you can see it marked in red. What I'm going to play for you is an animation of the auralization. Sometimes, depending on your bandwidth, it might be stretched. What you're going to see is as the cursor moves, it imprints the acoustics of Hagia Sophia. So you see how the sound becomes spread into that space, into this very resonant space, from the dry sound of the recording that directly connects to the mouths of the singer. Then you see how the sound, how the space imprints its resonant signature. The chant you just heard was written when in 628 the Emperor Heraclius brought the relics of the True Cross to the Byzantine capital and inaugurated the Constantinopolitan phase of this feast. Heraclius was remembered for his wars against the Persian Empire and as the last emperor to extend Christian power over Jerusalem. The Arab conquest of Jerusalem in 638 eliminated Byzantine authority in Holy Land. In the Middle Byzantine period, the desire and hope in recuperating the Holy City grew. (961) marked the conquest of Crete, which freed the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean from Arab pirate ships and opened the seas for trade and conquest. 969 was the recapture of Antioch, and 972 to 975 the Byzantine armies, led by the Emperor John Tzimiskis, pushed into Syria and Palestine, holding Homs, Sidon, and Byblos. The return of territories in Syria and Holy Land was celebrated in the visual arts. The Joshua roll that you see here elicits in its scroll format the triumphal narratives carved on the monumental columns set in the imperial fora of Constantinople. as for example the column of Arcadius in the early 5th century, which is on the triumphal processional routes of Constantinople, which elicits, of course, the model Trajan's column in Rome. The Joshua roll envisions the Byzantine army machine through the figures of the Israelites marching to recapture the Promised Land. Similarly, Byzantine victory in Palestine is couched as a return of the exiled faithful back home. This idea is prominent in a chant I'll analyze and then play for you. The Emperor Leo VI, 886-912, composed this melody and the poetry, and designed it as a chant, as ticheron, to be sung at orthros, intercalated in the canticles. Observe the triumphalist language. Come on, believers, let us worship the life-giving wood of the cross, on which Christ, the King of glory, willingly stretching his arms, raised us up to our ancient blessedness, out of which the enemy of old defrauded us through pleasure, making us exiles from God. So this idea of exile is very important. Come on, believers, let us worship the wood of the cross, through which we became worthy to crush the skulls of the invisible foes. Come on, all families of nations, let us honor in hymns the cross of the Lord. And this notion of all families of nations is very important because the Byzantine Empire courted confederates like the Armenians, the Georgians. So there is a sense of Christian mission of reconquering Holy Land. Then it continues. Hail, O cross, the complete redemption of fallen Adam. In you, our faithful emperors, boast, for through your power they mightily subdue the people of Ishmael, which is a reference to the Arabs. We Christians now kiss you with fear and glorify the God who was nailed on you, saying, Lord, you who have been nailed to the cross, have mercy on us, because you are good and a lover of mankind, philanthropos. Observe how in the first stanza, the wood of the cross, this is xylon proskynumen. The wood of the cross has saved humanity, but then the devil defrauded humanity, who are now exiled from paradise. The next stanza celebrates the cross as weapon wielded against the enemies, crushing their skulls, and these victories are celebrated with liturgical chants. The next stanza addresses the cross directly and boasts how through it the Byzantine emperors received their great glory, winning victories over the Arabs. And in the conclusion, the text turns back to the faithful who kiss the cross and adore Christ, asking him to have mercy on account of his love, shown in his willing sacrifice. Now the music sharpens the meaning. It signals a parallel between the great glory of Christ, Vasilistis Doxis, and that of the victories of the pious Byzantine emperors, Opistatoti Vasilis imon Kavchonte. The shared melodic motifs, which I have marked here in purple, are significant. The same glory had originally given humanity bliss in paradise, but then the same melodic motif in purple, surprisingly, appears with Satan, the one who defrauded humanity. So the very first verse sets this opposition, Vasilistis Doxis, the King of Glory, that had given bliss to humanity, and then humanity being deceived with a similar melody, but the result is that they are exiles now from God. The cadence, marked in gray, repeats the melodic motif previously sung about paradise, but now it marks the opposite, humanity's status as exiles from God. One other prominent melodic motif is sung on You Raised Us, here, ipsusen, just a second, ipsusen imas, and then it's repeated at the very end, creating a frame, eleison imas. Have mercy on us. Now let us listen I'll stop here. If you're interested and would like to listen to this music, it is all in the album The Lost Voices of Hagia Sophia in collaboration with Icons of Sound at Stanford. The album of Capella Romana is available online. You could purchase it through Amazon. It's also available Naxos and Spotify. So there are many means in which you can come to Leo VI, the Emperor's sticheron that you're hearing here. So the important part in this hymn is that it shows the direct mirroring between the power of God, the Vasilistis Doxus, and that is then invested in the Byzantine rulers, which gives them a chance to subdue their enemies. While Hagia Sophia gave a great stage to enact this eternal triumph, the interior never managed to pull figural decoration into the core of the celebration. The Justinianic Church originally lacked anthropomorphic figuration, and when the Patriarch Photius began after Iconoclasm to fill the interior with images of Christ, the Virgin, and saints, as for instance the apse mosaic of the Virgin and Child, in the 867, these were always too diminutive on the breathtaking scale of the architectural interior. In Hagia Sophia, the main medium of the metaphysical remained light and reverberant sound. It is other churches, delicate and much smaller in scale, such as the Palatine chapels and the aristocratic foundations, that carried out the new figural mandate, filling the interiors with scenes from the life of Christ, and celebrating Mary as the protector of Constantinople and the invincible leader of the Byzantine armies. And in the Q&A, I have lined up several images that I could show you of some of these Byzantine churches in Constantinople. I will now trace the glorious path of this Akatemachithus strategos, the invincible general Mary, in Hosios Loukas, a monastery on the maritime and land roads connecting Rome to Constantinople and Jerusalem. It embraces the Constantinopolitan liturgy and gives us a glimpse of the rich mosaic programs now lost in the Byzantine capital. I will argue that Hosios Loukas is a site celebrating victory on the imperial model. It emerges in a place developed by powerful Byzantine generals and a military commander, Catepano of Italy, and for these patrons, some of whom became the early abbots at the site, the idea of military victory and the opulent ceremonies of Constantinople served as a model to be emulated in the new foundation. Again, in the Q&A, I have slides and I could show you more about what we know about the founders and the fact that one of them was very high up with imperial, connected to the imperial family. The saint himself, Hosios Loukas, was born in the early 10th century and died in 953. His feast day is February 7th, and he was almost immediately integrated in the synaxarium, that's the sanctorale, of the Constantinopolitan liturgy, which speaks to his and his followers good connections in the Constantinopolitan networks. To being integrated into the main sanctorale so quickly is a good mark of his connections. Hosios Loukas excelled in ascesis. From early childhood, he abstained from cheese and even fruit and subsisted mostly on water, vegetables, and some bread. He acquired fame with his prayer, which brought about healings and prophecies and expressed itself visually in uplifting him and making him levitate inches from the ground. As mentioned earlier, my methodology is anchored in the Constantinopolitan liturgy. I trace how the chants prescribed for Hosios Loukas' feast on February 7th emulate the feasts of Christmas, baptism on January 6th, the presentation of the temple February 2nd, the feast of the prophet Simeon on February 3rd, as well as those of the military saints Theodore Stratelatis, February 8th, and Theodore the Recruit Tiron on February 17th. You can see in this enumeration that there is a cluster of feasts around February 7th, the feast of the saint, focused on the childhood of Christ, the most important of which is the Hippopanti on February 2nd. And it is this feast that the liturgy for Hosios Loukas, that inspired the liturgy for Hosios Loukas. The two main motifs here are the vesseling of Christ, modeled after Mary, repeated by the prophet Simeon and emulated by Hosios Loukas. And the second motif is victory. It is anchored into the paradoxical virginal motherhood of Mary as the invincible general and amplified by the military saints, the two Theodori. The vesseling is a parallel established between Hosios Loukas and Mary that emerges most powerfully in the oratory of the saint in the north cross arm. This is the north cross arm. Here on the western wall, so you have to imagine it here, above the marble revetment and the cornice, rise the gold mosaic in the tympanum. Here is Saint Hosios Loukas, arms lifted in prayer. He looks directly ahead. So just give me a chance. So we are looking here in the north arm of the cross and on the western wall, and here is Hosios Loukas. Across from him, in the eastern tympanum, is the mirroring lunette with the Theotokos carrying the Christ child in her arms, and you can see it here as well. She is of the Hodeitria type, directing with her free hand the faithful towards the Logos, and thus recalling the emerging powerful Hodeitria icon of Constantinople. The relics of the same were deposited in a theke, or chas, in the marble ciborium right underneath this Marian image. Holy oil miraculously flowed from the Soros from the tomb, bringing healing and blessing. Right in this period, the 11th century, the Hodeitria icon rises in importance in Constantinople. So this is a very specific image. Here is a later icon with the epithet Hodeitria written on the icon itself to give you a sense of what this icon looked like, because the original has not survived. It was housed in a monastery of the Guides, the Hodei, here, close to Hagia Sophia. This monastery, this foundation, is a newcomer, only appearing in the 9th century, but it quickly seized greater authority. By the late 11th century, we have textual sources that attribute the victory over the Avars in 621 to the miraculous intervention of the icon of the Holygon monastery, the Hodeitria. The memory of the siege was celebrated on the 5th Friday of Lent with a procession from Hagia Sophia to the Vlaherna church. So from here all the way to the Vlaherna church. Here at Orthros, or Lauds, the special hymn to Mary, the Acathistos, was chanted. The hymn was written in the 5th or the 6th centuries, but it acquired a new prologue, a second prologue, sometime after the Avar and Arab sieges. And so here is the prologue. It says, "To you, the undefeatable general, I, your city, saved from disasters, dedicate hymns of victory and thanksgiving. To you, Theotoke, because you have unassailable might against the dangers. Deliver me now, so that I might cry out to you, Hail, bride unwedded." The words that mark the military might of Mary as strategos, she is the hypermachos stratego, and then the complex adjectives all generated from machi, vero, hypermachos, aprosmachitus, unassailable, and she is praised in victory and thanksgiving chants, nikitiria and eucharistiria. Let us listen. You will see the music sharpens the attention on Mary's military prowess, because the same melodic motif, which I mark here in red, is repeated on the words that say victory, thanksgiving, you Theotoke, invincible and free us. And then the refrain, Hail bride unwedded, is sung to an expansion, a variation of this melodic motif. And again, it's Capella Romana singing, it's from a different album, and it is oralized post-production in the Acoustics of Hagia Sophia. I'll play only a small segment. First of all, you see that the melody is less complex than what we heard from the Sticheron of Leo, and it is designed to be sung by many people. So it's easy to learn and easy to reproduce because it has a lot of repetition. The music is written in mode A, G plagal. A leap of a fourth in these special motifs that I'm speaking about, from G to C, marks the introduction of this motif, and then the voice climbs to D and even higher, reaching E as a grace mode, which is the upper limit of this mode. The leap is a sonic attack, which will bring out the brilliance of sound and activate the acoustics of domes, reproducing a golden rain. Now this chant is sung both outside and inside, so it has the capacity of being a processional chant as well as being sung inside a ecclesiastical space. The refrain, bride unwedded, at the very end, nymphi a nympheta, is an amplification of the same melodic motif with further melismas. The Hodeitria icon embedded itself in the Acathistos feast and this chant. The iconography is new, while deceptively evocative of early iconographic times. The composition, as you see in the Roman icons of the 7th century, show the Virgin carrying the child, but if you look at her hands, she doesn't lift a hand to gesture towards Christ. This is what the Hodegetria icon articulates very clearly once its iconography becomes established. The same iconography of the Hodegetria starts to appear on Byzantine coins, on imperial coins, as you see here for the first time on the coins of Romanos III Argyros. And it also appears in the art that is connected at the highest level of patronage in the satellite states, like Georgia, where David of Tau, the objects that are connected with his patronage, show multiplicity of this iconography. So even if no toponymic epithet like Hodegetria survives in the north chapel of Hosios Loukas, next to the image of the Virgin, it is this icon that is evoked. And just like the Hodegetria, echoing the memory of the Avar siege and the Acathistus hymn, so too Hosios Loukas acquired his own kontakion, modeled on the Acathistus. And here is the beginning of the kontakion, sung to the music of the Hypermachos Stratego, and it starts, God, the one having chosen you for his own satisfaction, before you were formed by judgments known to himself, having taken you, Hosios Loukas, for himself from the womb, sanctifies and acknowledges you as his faithful servant, directing your steps. Loukas, the one, the lover of mankind, by whom you now stand rejoicing. And then what follows are the stanze, and just mark the address of Here, Lampron Monazonton. So, hail bright glory of the monks. They repeat, in a sense, the address that one knows with the Acathistus dedicated to the Virgin, with a series of metaphors that are elicited of Mary. I'm not going to go through all of them for lack of time, but I'll draw your attention on the ones that are about light, like the one that we just saw, the light of the monks, as well as Hail, august receptacle of the Spirit. Here septon dohion ton pneumatos. When we compare the heretismi, these here expressions that start with Hail, to that of the Theotokos, we see that both start with light. Hosios Loukas is the bright glory of the monks, leader and lamp. This concept is modeled on Mary as the lamp through whom joy shall shine forth. Later on, Hosios Loukas is called a douchion, receptacle of the Spirit, which mirrors Mary as incarnating the Logos. The connection between Hosios Loukas, present in the chant, in the shared kontakion, and especially the shared melody, becomes prominent further, connected to the idea of victory. And so give me a second. The light in my office is motion operated, so it switched off some time ago, and it's getting darker. So anyways, now we have light. The mosaic, so the dome expands this idea further about victory. The mosaics were lost in an earthquake in the 17th century, but the restored frescoes allegedly reproduce the Byzantine original. It is an image that elicits three different scenes, deesis and intercession. So this will be a better way to view it. So here is the Virgin, and she's opposite her is John the Baptist, and then at the sides are the four chief archangels. The composition with Christ at the center, flanked by John the Baptist and the Virgin, is a deesis, but at the same time the position of Mary also elicits the compositions of ascension And last but not least, it also elicits the Assumption of the Virgin. So there are a series of scenes that are elicited within this representation. And I'm showing you a pectoral cross from the first half of the 9th century that has the Ascension, that has the Decis on the other side, and all of the scenes that actually appear in Hosios Loukas. This connection was drawn long time ago by Kitzinger, but I'm bringing it up because I want to focus on the Ascension. The Constantinopolitan feast of the Ascension is co-opted for eternal victory of the Byzantine emperors. Many of the chants focus on Mary as the invincible general, the wings of protection, the spring well of salvation. This notion of water well, or hagiasma, is of crucial importance, for it's also written in the inscriptions around the apse of Hosios Loukas here that speaks about hagiasma of the ancient of times. The chants that I'm going to draw your attention to were performed first in the palace, and then they were sung at different stages on the processional road as the cortege unfolded to the Forum of Constantine and proceeded through this arm of one of the major thoroughfares of Constantinople. So here are some of the texts that are related, that are sung. Having found in you alone a holy spring, an ever-living stream, O Holy Mother of God, we Christians entreat you as Theotokos and appeal to you with unceasing voice. Protect the emperors. The names are not mentioned in the chant right now because it's a prescriptive chant, with the wings of your intercession until the end. Or another one. We the people fittingly praise you, the bridal chamber, pastas of Christ, through whom Christ shone forth in the flesh of mortals. Theotokos, save the rulers as luminaries for the exaltation of the world. Or another one. Virgin Mother of God, the spring of life for the Romans. Fight alongside the rulers in the purple, who received their crown from you, since those in the purple have in you an invincible shield against all. Or another one. We Christians, having you, the All-Holy, as our hope of refuge and salvation and promise of support, appeal to you as our shelter. Favor the rulers with the wings of your intercession. And the last one, from the same feast. O wondrous sight, like rain on a woolen fleece, the word of the Father. Now behold, he who took on flesh is ascending into heaven, since he has fulfilled the will of the Father, having invited all nations to serve the truth. From there, having fulfilled the dispensation as regards us, he sat on the right hand of the Lord of might. May he guard you, benefactors, for the good fortune of the Romans, the Byzantines. So in reading you this series of chants and recitations that take place at the Ascension ceremony, starting with the palace and then continuing through the urban framework of the city, there is an insistence on the role of Mary. It first starts with the image of Mary. She is the protector, the wings, she is the spring, the pigi, and the pastas, the bridal chamber, and she spreads her wings, these pteriges, over the Byzantine emperors. And she is also their systrategisan moni, the one who walks along them as a general in the battles and offers them protection. So we have protection and military might that is manifested through the Virgin. And then at the very end of the ceremony, what we hear is the Ascension. And the Ascension starts with this incarnational image of rain that descends on the fleece. Well, hagiasma, spring, pigi, pteriges, wings of protection, hietos epipokon, rain on fleece, words for water, drawing attention to the divine power as the force of many waters, and associating this acoustic sensation with the flow of light, divine radiance shining brightly. The same ideas permeate the apse of Hosios Loukas. The inscription surrounding the enthroned Virgin and Child, which starts here, reads, Tho ikusu prepi agiasma Kyrie, is makrotita himeron. Holiness becomes thy house, O Lord, forever. Psalm 92, or in the modern versions 93 verse 5, is recited at Vespers, intercalated in the Stichera for Christmas. The same Psalm 92 is also recited at Vespers on January 6th for the baptism, two of the images that are present at the corners in the squinches of Hosios Loukas. While the light of the star identifies the kenosis, the emptying of the logos in a mortal body, at baptism it does the opposite, recognizing the divinity of Christ as the rays synesthetically communicate the voice of the Father, identifying his Son. The flow of water becomes the visualization of Psalm 92, also in the marginal psalters, the Theodore Psalter of the I have it here, just a second. In the Theodore Psalter, visualizing verses 3 and 4. The rivers have lifted up, O Lord, the rivers have lifted up their voices. At the voices of many waters, the billows of the sea are wonderful. The Lord is wonderful at high places. Not only do these lines connect to the divine energy as the powerful gush of waters, and connect to, in the celebration of the Ascension, Mary as the spring, but they insist on the power of the metaphysical as a resonant sound, like the thundering of a vast masses of uncontainable waters. This energy produces miracles. Now the domed interior of Hosios Loukas, its reflective surfaces, and substantial interior volume will produce long reverberation. Thus will incarnate in time the voice of many waters, translating synesthetically the flow of water and light into wet sound, similar, though reduced in scale, to the reverberation of Hagia Sophia. The diameter of the dome is 9 meters, and it's the largest diameter of these Middle Byzantine churches. Moreover, the quoted word hagiasma also speaks of pouring, a flow of light and water, and this imaginary flow amplifies with the pairing of the Pentecost here, with the flow of spirit into the bodies of the apostles. Already the marginal psalters of the mid-9th century envisioned the incarnation as the flow of light and water, dewdrops on the fleece, as shown here illustrating Psalm 71 verse 6. He shall come down as rain upon a fleece, and as drops falling upon the earth. The phrase communicates the incarnation as the descent, the pouring of light, and you can see it here, which is also a pouring of water, and the image picks up the same idea as blue shafts of light water as they frame the descent of the Holy Spirit. The incarnation is further specified with the precision the little phrases identifying Mary and the scene here. En tigastri partheno and Theotokos, into the body, into the womb of the Virgin, the Theotokos, which is also the virginal motherhood, the invincible force that makes her into unassailable strategos, general. Outpouring of water, divine might flowing, thundering voice of many waters, all these metaphors of liquescence of the divine become a powerful mirror of the soros, or the tomb of the saint, here in Hosios Loukas. Just like the descent of life-giving energy of the Spirit in Pentecost, or the radiant rays of the Incarnation, or the voice of baptism, the theke, the soros of Hosios Loukas, produces a similar flow, making this divine outpouring accessible to the faithful, bringing it closer to earth, to the level that can be reached and touched by human hands. Remember, the soros is in the north chapel underneath the image of the Hodeitria, here in this ciborium. As Ode 7 of Canon 3 for Orthros for the feast of Hosios Loukas on February 7 states, and this is recorded in Middle Byzantine Menologia, like here the Menologion from the British Library. And it says, "The Thiki of your Lipsena, Lucas, is a spring of healings, in which all who come are freed from all suffering. This spring enhances your honor, blessed Hosios, and that of your Lord Christ. Paradoxically, the outflow is possible through the opposite, the capacity to vessel in Christ. Hosios Loukas does that canonically by opening his arms in prayer. Mary, by contrast, has her arm full, carrying the child. But both Hosios Loukas and the Theotokos are douchia, vessels of the Spirit. The vesseling of the divine, as exemplified by Mary, is also exemplified by Mary and the prophet Simeon. Remember the feasts, February 2nd, of the presentation of the temple, Hippopanti, and the feast of Simeon the following day, February 3rd. A number of truparia, these are chants, and stihera, also chants, for the feast of Hippopanti make this connection. And this embeddedness of the poetry of Hippopanti is also present, especially with the notion of vesseling in, is present in the Liturgy of the Saint for February 7th. I'll read you a couple of those chants. The first one that you see here is the Truparion for the feast of the presentation of the temple, that becomes the Truparion for the feast of Hosios Loukas. It says, "Hail, full of grace, Theotoke pertene, for you are the Son of Justice that arises. Christ our God, irradiating those in darkness. Rejoice also you old men," referring to Simeon, "having received in your arms the one who would save all souls, bestowing his anastasis as blessing for us." End of quote. The Truparion is the identity chant for the feast of Hippopanti, and it ingathers the Annunciation with the Hippopanti, with its called Here ke charitomeni, "Hail, full of grace." But then, as the sun that illuminates those in darkness, it introduces the passion tones of proleptically envisioning Christ's sacrifice that will bring anastasis as blessing for all. Only through his outpouring of blood, human salvation is purchased. The same dark tones will emerge in some of the address to the prophet Simeon, where he identifies the child with the name Kyrion or Kyrios tis doxis, the Lord of Glory. Further stihera for both feasts are record this notion of vesseling in, carrying Christ. Here, from the feast of Hosios Loukas, I'll read you a couple of those. The pure and immaculate Parthene, carrying the Creator and Lord as child in her arms, enters in the temple. A second one. Receive, O Simeon, the Lord of Glory. You are given a sign from the Holy Spirit. You are in his Christ's presence. And the last one I'll read to you. Now my eyes, having seen your good announcement, you, the good one, release from life your servant Simeon, you, lover of mankind. So these are stihera that are from February 2nd and February 3rd, but they appear on February 7th, the celebration of Hosios Loukas, anchoring the parallel drawn between Hosios Loukas, Mary, and the prophet Simeon as vessels of the Spirit. Modeling himself after Mary and the prophet Simeon, Hosios Loukas becomes a douchion of Christ, transforming himself into a spring through which the Holy Spirit offers healing, salvation, and victories. In conclusion, the glittering gold mosaics, with narratives spanning the early life of Christ, focus on the triumphal message of incarnation of the Logos and the divine power as awesome and deafening bright sound of falling water and effusion of light. These ideas were interwoven in the Constantinopolitan liturgy, celebrating the imperial political concept of eternal victory. When its generals built their own churches, They infused them with the imperial language of power and confidence in Byzantium's revival and reconquest of Holy Land. These resplendent interiors proclaim the message that the Byzantines, while formerly made exiles, are now entering into divine grace with the promise of returning to Jerusalem. The sound of water and the flow of rivers of gold enveloped the faithful. The church interior became an icon of sound and light that embraced the congregation, making them live ephemerally inside the icon of God. This is an anamorphosis that gives us, modern viewers of Byzantine art, the chance to recognize how we, trained by Renaissance perspective, look at the image as flat, enticingly inviting us in its pictorial's fictitious depth, but ultimately rejecting us from us. We are exiles to the image. We have become exiles, unlike the medieval Byzantine anamorphosis image that enveloped the viewer, making him or her inhabit the metaphysical, albeit for the duration of the glittering golden rain that they themselves elicited by chanting. This is a participatory metaxic model of iconicity, anchored in the Eucharist. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bissera. We'll give you a chance to catch your breath for a minute, but what a wonderful layering of so many media of, of expression in that period. So I see one hand up, and maybe the hand feature will work. If you're in the audience and you have a question, if you raise your digital hand through one of the controls at the bottom of your Zoom screen, then your window should be made more prominent and visible to me, and I'll be able to call on you. But I see one question right away from my colleague Albrecht Klassen. So Albrecht, go ahead.
Thank you very much. This was a wonderful, very rich presentation, and I really give you a lot of credit for doing this such a marvelous technological approach to the medieval components. That was really very well done. I'm very impressed, so thank you so much, and I feel very enriched. I have two questions, maybe packaged into one. I wonder whether you would be willing to come along and maybe accept a more broad definition or description of this sacred space. I mean, I know exactly you focusing on the Hagia Sophia and the Greek Orthodox Church space, but I wonder, coming more from the Western perspective and not being an art historian, so forgive me if I say something foolish, but isn't that maybe one of the key points of most, if not all, Christian churches, East or West, to combine the various dimensions of visual experience? And then I have an example I want to bring in, but first, the second point is whether you might go along with me using this technical term of Gesamtkunstwerk for what you have described. And maybe the concrete example, I just accepted an article for our journal Medievistic that deals with a little chapel outside or next to the Cathedral of Paderborn, which was northern Germany, which was apparently deeply influenced by Byzantine architecture, where it's a very simple chapel, extremely simple, but where many of the musical features you described come into play with an enormous, shall we say, an expansion of human space into sacred space. Of course, this little chapel has no comparison to the splendor, the divine splendor of the Hagia Sophia, but this combination of sound, images, sculptures, light, this is really, I would say, what makes a Gesamtkunstwerk. I hope you're familiar with that term. If not, I'm spelling it. So, but maybe these two questions. Thank you.
First of all, thank you, Albrecht. I will respond, yes, of course. And that's why in the conclusions, I slyly said medieval images and I didn't stick with Byzantine. Because one of my major research projects right now is on Sainte-Foy at Caen, where I'm collaborating with the composer of choral chant. She has transcribed the music for the Feast of the Saint, which has not been performed for over 500 years. I have been translating the Latin, and we have been auralizing this chant in the Acoustics of Conch because I had gathered acoustic data, and this is the work Jonathan Abu is helping us with the auralization. So there is a new project, it's called Enchanted Images. We have a website, and it extends this idea of the anamorphic image that you inhabit, that you're inside the divine. And it's an interactive image because you create it through chant, through your participation in the liturgy. And I'm giving a second talk at the end of this week, also part of University of Arizona's. You're welcome to come, and it will be on Conch, and it will look at the liturgy for Vespers, and it will show how both the sound and the acoustics of this space, focusing attention on the invisible return, descent of the saint at the day of her ascent, because this is the moment in which she comes closer to the faithful, and this is also the moment that celebrates her ascension into heaven. And this is done magnificently through the use of chiastic structures, to focusing attention on smell, that it is done through repeated melodic motifs, because I would like to show that what I have discovered in terms of Hagia Sophia, it's not specific to Hagia Sophia. It is worked on a level of mesmerizing and awesomeness that other sites didn't have the means to do that, but it is present at other sites. So, and therefore, in a sense, I embrace medieval art because this is also not just a Christian phenomenon. One sees aspects of it within mosque spaces. So I don't know if I would plow so profoundly within the Islamic realm in the future, but for now I feel comfortable working with both the Greek and the Latin material. So the second talk is at 12:30. Maybe it is it 12:30 Arizona?
It's 1:30 Tucson time. Yeah.
1:30 Arizona time.
Yeah.
So yes, this phenomenon is in a sense in the most successful foundations, spiritual foundations. It is work to perfection with the means that are available there.
Thank you.
I don't see another hand yet, but I have a question. Something that's intrigued me about your previous work is the sense that in the sonic environment of these Byzantine churches, with their hard surfaces and reflections and reverberation, that the intelligibility of the words was not primary. There was a kind of immersive sound. And so, you know, when you've taken us through the language that focuses on a word choice relating to victory or leadership and so forth, I'm wondering how intelligible those words are and whether there's an intermusicality. I think you were indicating this, that there are certain phrases that recur or that echo, and I'm just trying to get a sense of the weight that they bear in this expression, as opposed to the intelligibility of the words, if they were intelligible. So
in general, intelligibility is connected also to social status, that the and gender, that the male courtiers who are in the kalichoros under the dome at the ground level of Hagia Sophia, they're closest to the choir, which sings. I'll actually go back to an image to show you. Just a second. I am
okay, sure.
writing. Yes, that would be. the choir was, so you have to imagine that there is a pie-shaped banister,
Mhm.
the sanctuary barrier, and then in the middle, expanding as an arm into along the central axis of the building, was the corridor that led to a platform, the ambo. The choir is on that ambo. When the choir sings, because the ambo has stairs on both sides, they climb up and they perform, projecting their voices towards the dome. When they don't perform, they go down and they hide, in a sense, underneath the ambo, which is raised on columns. This structure that you should imagine, this triangular structure. And this allows for the officiating clergy to go up and down the ambo for recitations, for the sermons, and so on and so forth. So it's a multifunction. So the reason why am I saying that is that the male aristocracy of the court is very close to the ambo, so they hear very well. The further you are, and spaces, there's some dead spaces, like the corners of the building, for instance, the northwestern corner of the building. And we know that women were relegated to that space. So in other words, intelligibility is connected with social status. But there is also another aspect, that singing. There is a desire to transcend the limits of the human register of language and touch upon something that is metaphysical. And so in a space that is resonant, so many of the chants, and especially chants that we know for sure were composed after the Justinianic construction of Hagia Sophia, they extensively use melismas and intercalations, which means that there is a concentrated effort to emphasize, to amplify this aspect of the metaphysical sound that is beyond the register of the human voice. And having said last thing, the liturgy is very well known. And like, let's say, the singing of the psalmody, or the singing of the troparia, these signature chants that identify the feast, like the troparion I gave you of Hereke Heritomeni for the Theotokos, for the feast of the presentation of the temple, which means that there's also another aspect, how not to be bored, that you can tune in and tune out of what is being sung, you know it. And each time, in a sense, it is a new instantiation. And it is this continuous dance of eternity and time that is present in the performance of the liturgy. So what I would say is that there is quite enough of culturally shared knowledge of the chants for this text to be well known. And probably one would say that there is a greater intelligibility within the Byzantine realm of the discussion of this acoustics, architecture, and liturgy, as opposed to the West, because knowing Latin became more and more an elite sphere of knowledge, as opposed to the Byzantine chants, which I'm not comparing them to the sermons. The Byzantine chants are written in a language that it's easier to understand. It's not convoluted most of the time. Like, for instance, what we heard from the poetry of the Emperor Leo VI, it was very straightforward. So in other words, there is no barrier, language barrier, for a Byzantine in the Middle Byzantine period of understanding the chants.
Thank you very much. That's fascinating. And I see a question in the chat that I'll pose to you that's about sources. Or Radu, do you want to ask this directly?
Hello. Yes, I would like to know about the sources of the early Byzantine music. Where did it came from? How much was influenced by the Jewish or the Greek traditions?
So it is such a large question. Thank you for answering it. I have not invested research-wise in exploring the connections with the Jewish ritual. It's clearly important, and there are studies that really explore the interconnections between Hagia Sophia and the Great Temple. So I don't have the expertise to answer this question. When it comes to ancient Greece, what one could see is that this is not so much, I'm not answering so much the liturgical question, but when it comes to the ekphrasis of Hagia Sophia, they're very much invested in Homeric language. And this Homeric language oscillates with ideas like choros, this notion of human dance and chant that is a sacrifice, a way to address the gods. And only in human action can divinity become present and divine reciprocation can be established. So this is a model that is in the archaic poetry of horos, this circular dynamic that produces the divine response, which is charis, grace. And one sees that in the Byzantine chants, sometimes in terms of the chiastic structure of the chants, which is at the core of this idea of horos and charis. It's connected also to Christos, and Christos as the one who is being anointed. So in other words, there is resonance of ancient practices, ritual practices, in the way concepts of them structure Byzantine chants. Now, when it comes to the liturgy of Constantinople, so the sources that I rely very heavily on is, first of all, the Typicon, or the foundation document, which is basically the stages of the liturgy for different feasts of Hagia Sophia. It's the Typicon of Hagia Sophia. I also rely on many of the monastic typica of Constantinople, the Everget. This is very important for me in this particular study. And through years of collaboration with Alexander Lingas, the artistic director of Capella Romana, he had introduced me to manuscripts that transmit Byzantine chant, like for instance the Stichera of Leo VI, much closer attention in Menea, that record the sanctoral cycle of the Byzantine Church. So once one starts looking at from the point of view of liturgy and the performance of this liturgy, actually there is a wealth of information that survives. And for this particular project, I had a point sometime in late May, early June, in which I went through 100 Menea that exist online just to find the feast of the saint, because we were relying on the 19th century sources. So there's so much that is available. We just haven't mined it.
Thank you so much. I see another question. Fred Ostron, would you like to pose your question directly?
Sure, happy to. Thank you for the talk. It's very interesting. Are you able to extrapolate from your work, from your identification of the contours of this complex program, about acoustic knowledge that architects or builders might have used? In other words, would a builder or an architect have a general sense of creating volume and space, or were there any specific features of their work that had acoustic outcomes in mind?
Well, another excellent question, and again, I will start my PowerPoint to show one of these Middle Byzantine churches in Constantinople. So the answer to that question, we don't have any direct sources. The type of sources we would like to hear that comment when it comes to the design of Hagia Sophia, we know that these are two engineer physicists, Anthemius of Tralles and Isidoros of Miletus. We don't have any comments that they have recorded in terms of their design of Hagia Sophia, but the type of treatises they sponsored or they wrote themselves shows that they were interested in the reflection of light, and since light and sound are waves, in a sense, their knowledge of light would have contributed to their knowledge and experience of sound waves in the space. There are two Neoplatonists, and they're the last, in a sense, of the school of Alexandria. And it is highly likely that they were crypto-pagans and not Christians. So I could expound more on that, but that's beside the topic. In other words, we don't know. But what we do know is that Christianity, when it becomes an imperial religion in the way Constantine promotes it, coincides with a vast control of the Mediterranean, and especially a new building material, the Proconnesian marble, that is exploited and sent to different parts of the empire. It is Proconnesian marble that defines the early the basilicas, from first century on. And these basilicas were done for large urban populations, which means great interior volume and reflective surfaces. They don't have domes. And so you don't have the golden rain in this space. However, Christianity, as it becomes an urban religion and accepted by the elite, becomes associated with resonant sound. And what we start seeing is that these aspects of the resonant sound are mined by the liturgy of the urban liturgy, the cathedral liturgy, as for instance the fixed psalms that are sung for orthros, that is louds, and hesperinos, the vespers, that they draw on, for instance, Psalm 68 of rising from bed and being parched and looking for God, in a sense, for to give water to that thirst. So it is post factum. What we see is really post factum association of Old Testament statements about the divine presence as water in the experience that becomes an acoustic experience. So intention is one of the most difficult questions to answer, possibly impossible, because we don't have the written sources. But what we see in Byzantium is that when they start building smaller, they continue to maintain reverberation, long reverberation. And this is what I wanted to show you. So one of these churches is dedicated to Theotokos Panakhranti. It is the O Holy Virgin. It is the monastery also known of Constantine Lips or Livu. He was a courtier. He was the responsible for the guards, the imperial guards of the palace, and this church is inaugurated in 907. It's one of two churches. The Middle Byzantine one of 907 is the North Church. It is also our first example of the so-called crossing square design, when 4 columns mark the central square and they support the dome. The dome itself creates this reverberant, enhances the reverberation, and also can continue to produce the golden rain in that space. So this church is magnificent. It had mosaics, and it would have been one of these examples where resonant sound was produced in smaller scale in interiors that created the audiovisual effect of golden rain. The church itself, as I was preparing for this talk, its inscription that is written on the cornice was never truly translated correctly, and one sees there that it was dedicated to the Virgin as the protectress of the city, which is Athena Pallas's epithet that becomes part and parcel of Mary's vision in Constantinople as the one who is the shield and general. So, in other words, complex question, hard to answer. The only evidence is the monuments themselves.
Yes. Thank you. Are there other questions? Oh, yes, there's one from Hanbing Liang. Would you like to pose your question directly?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Thank you. Actually, I'm just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on the concept of metaphysical sound that you just mentioned previously, and how would you define metaphysical sound? Is this like attributable to certain range of frequencies, or are there like other characteristics of sound created by the church that are perceived as metaphysical?
Very inspirational question. I'll say a little bit right now. Working in Hagia Sophia is a challenge. Now it's even more so than 10 years ago when I started this project. To answer such a question, I think it requires having access to the building, more frequent and more extensive access. We never had that. Icons of Sound, the project that I co-direct. We were given a lot of possibilities around the year 2010, but with the years, in a sense, this access had diminished to zero right now. And why am I saying that? Because I don't have, in a sense, the observations and studies that I could offer. But another example, Conques in France, is a place that actually can be studied to project these ideas. And this is about the effect of harmonics in the space. A recent article, excellent article by Sharon Gerstel and her team, focused on the association, the interlinkage between frescoes that show angels in the domes and the experience of fluttering sound in the dome, fluttering effect in the dome. So I would draw your attention to this article. It just came out in the Gesta volume this fall. And the reason I'm bringing it is because harmonics play a very important role. This means that as the human energy is emptied in the space, it leads to the repetition of layering that leads to the appearance of frequencies that are twice the base frequency, 3 times the base frequency, 4 times, 5 times, and so on and so forth. In other words, the sound is amplified, and these frequencies are very hearable in Hagia Sophia. And it shows that there is this liquescent and metaphysical aspect of the sound that is bright sound of high frequencies that builds on the fundamental human frequencies that is exhaled in this space. And all churches have the capacity to do that. And so when we start looking at the way church spaces respond to this idea, for instance, the image of the angels in the pendentives of Hagia Sophia, or the image of the angels in the squinches of Conch, speak to this notion of synergy between human choirs on earth and what is physical phenomena, harmonics in the space, as the angelic sound, that in a sense humanity activates and makes what is sounding all the time but humanity cannot hear, and that is the musica mondana, the music of the spheres. So it is, in general, a fascinating aspect. I am interested in that metaphysics of sound, and as I said, it's connected to the harmonics in the space, and each space is slightly different. So it means that also each choir singing in that space will have to figure out how to latch itself to the timbre of the room, to what could produce the best, in a sense, the brightest of this sonic effect in the space.
That is awesome. Thank you so much. Would you mind sharing the topic, the title of the article again?
I don't know the title of the article, I'm sorry, but I will share the name, Sharon Gerstel, and then the other thing that you should look is in my book on Hagia Sophia, there are several of the chapters speak about this sonic effect in Hagia Sophia. I'm sorry, it's Sharon Gerstel, so it's not an E, but an O in her first name. I usually don't look at what I write, so typos start to appear.
And I think that Bissera said it's an article that came out in a very recent issue of the journal Gesta, spelled Gesta. So thank you. Are there, I know time is getting on, but are there any more questions? I did want to repeat something that I put in the chat. First of all, that we have recorded this lecture and this discussion. So if you would like to have access to the recording, it will be made available through the U of A and through ICMA, or you can simply email me, scroll back through the chat and you'll see my email address, and I'll be happy to provide the link as soon as it's ready. I also want to emphasize that there is a second component of this year's Stahl lecture, and that is the lecture on the fabulous church of Sainte-Foy at Conques on Friday. So I hope that you saw a link to register for that in the same place where you saw the link to register for this lecture, but we'd be delighted to have you join us again. And that lecture will be hosted by Arizona State University. So, well, I want to thank Bissera for just a delightful lecture that lived up to my expectations in terms of the richness of the material and the inspiration for thinking about multi-sensory experience in not just in buildings of the past, but in buildings of the present too. So for those of us who are training the architects of the future, we want them to feel the power of these works from the past and the richness of the way in which they instantiate incredible cultural ideas of the period. So thank you so much. And we really look forward to being with you again on Friday.
Laura, thank you. And I also put in the field, in the chat, the two websites, one on Hagia Sophia, iconsofsound.stanford.edu, and the second one, our new research project, enchantedimages.stanford.edu on Conch. And Laura, I could stay a little bit. We can eventually stop the
Please,
recording.
that would be fine. Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your evening. Bye-bye.